Good afternoon, everybody. That was a pretty exciting video. I'm jazzed up. I hope you all are as well. Just a couple things. Let's see. So welcome to our discussion on Pathways to 24/7 Accelerating Climate Solutions. I'm Jeanette Pablo, the Director of Climate Equity at Clean Air Task Force, and I'll be the moderator. Two housekeeping items. We are going to actually be recording this session, and you can reach out to me for more information after the COP, but we'll also coordinate with your staffs to make sure you get a copy, and then we'll let you know where it's going to be on YouTube or wherever. And then the other one, I'm pretty excited to talk about this as well for like 1 second, is the QR code. Actually, if you want to speak in a different language or listen in a different language, you can use the QR code. It will connect you to 45 different language choices, and I think this is kind of a big first in a lot of COPs. So please feel free to take use of that. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'm going to make it short because everybody wants to hear what you have to say. But Bruce Douglas, right there, has 25 years of international experience in the promotion of renewable energy and electrification. He's currently CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance, the single voice for wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, long-duration energy storage, and green hydrogen industries at the international level. Irina Lazzerini is, there we go, thank you, is a clean energy principal specialist at SEForAll, building the organization's presence in Asia-Pacific, managing the 24/7 carbon-free energy compact, and the development of the Southeast Asia renewable manufacturing workstream. Carlos Leipner, my colleague, is the Director of Global Nuclear Energy Strategy at Clean Air Task Force. And his job is to develop and implement a pathway for expanded, safe, and economic use of nuclear energy globally to address climate change and support expanded energy access. Katie Ott is Vice President of Sustainability and Climate Strategy, leading environmental and regulatory strategy at Constellation, the largest producer of carbon-free energy in the United States. In her role, Katie and her team are responsible for Constellation's sustainability policy, EPA regulatory issues, climate roadmap strategy, environmental, social, and governance reporting and engagement, and climate disclosures and environmental tracking and reporting. Rich Powell, longtime friend, is CEO of ClearPath and ClearPath Action, Washington, D.C.-based organizations advancing policies that accelerate breakthrough innovations to reduce emissions in the energy and industrial sectors. Rich advises policymakers on investing wisely in energy innovation, removing roadblocks to building and exporting American clean energy and industrial technology. He frequently testifies before Congress on climate change and energy innovation. Last but not least, Devon Swezey is Senior Manager for Global Energy and Climate at Google, where he leads clean energy advocacy, particularly supporting Google's efforts to operate on 24/7 carbon-free energy across the world. Devon is the lead author of Google's recently published papers, The Corporate Role in Accelerating Advanced Clean Electricity Technologies, and a Policy Roadmap for 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy. Before we begin our discussion, I'd just like to take 1 or 2 minutes to recognize a recent announcement at COP28 by the U.S. White House Council on Environmental Quality, which is the U.S. government has officially joined the 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact. The White House press release noted that the compact has over 140 members, including, I am pleased to say, this is the pitch, Clean Air Task Force, which was the first environmental NGO to join the compact. The compact is based on the following 5 principles for accelerating decarbonization electricity grids. Turn the page here. Time-matched procurement, local procurement of clean energy, technology inclusiveness, enabling new generation to support rapid decarbonization, and maximizing system impact. So let's jump right in. The first question is, I have a few questions, and each of you will answer as you wish, but I'm going to choose a name to start, okay? So each of you are among the earliest to recognize the value of the 24/7 initiative, and I think our audience would be very interested in learning, how does one become a leader in a new policy arena, especially on a cutting-edge issue like this? And I'd like to invite Rich to, as you were one of the first ones I actually talked to about this issue, to maybe start the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Jeanette. Thank you to Clean Air Task Force for pulling together this fantastic discussion, and it is so wonderful to be here with so many great friends and colleagues who we've worked with for years to advance these issues. I think for us it was relatively straightforward, which was that folks that were at this even earlier than we were and had thought really, really deeply about how to deeply decarbonize power sectors both in the U.S. and around the world. We're realizing that we were focusing on a very limited set of technologies and a very limited set of approaches for what was actually a much larger and more complex problem than we had anticipated. And so as we understood more and more the dynamics, not just of how power grids actually would need to function in a zero carbon world, but also how those grids were going to have to support the decarbonization of all the other sectors, transportation, heavy industry, topics we are so much further behind on. It just became clear to us that a focus on 24/7, a focus on a broader suite of technologies was going to be essential to drive forward on all this. And so we've been so inspired over the last couple of years by all of the progress that, do I say Google or Alphabet? Okay, that Google has made on this by all the shared advocacy we've been able to do with Clean Air Task Force, on this by all of the energy that Constellation has brought into this, like pun intended, I guess, on that as well. And I'm just delighted to see that it really seems like a growing global conversation and alignment around these concepts.
Great. Well, so speaking of Google, I think it was your early paper, was it 2018 or 2017, that just really opened our eyes to the 24/7 results and possibility. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Jeanette, and thanks again for hosting, Clean Air Task Force for hosting this important discussion. So we have been on this decarbonization journey as a company and a sort of growing consumer of electricity for a long time. We were actually one of the first non-utility companies to sign a corporate power purchase agreement for renewable power in 2010. Which is a model that has now been standardized, so much that there was now 37 gigawatts last year of new clean power procurement through PPAs across the world, primarily for renewable technologies, which was a record number, and I think is going to continue to grow. And in 2017, we had purchased so much renewable power that we had matched 100% of our annual global electricity consumption with purchases of renewable energy. And you started to see many companies come out and say, the goal is to be 100% renewable powered. And what they were referring to was this annual matching of renewable energy with consumption. But we knew at the time, as we set that goal, and also as we were approaching that goal, that matching 100% of our annual consumption with renewable energy is a really important milestone, but it's not the same thing as fully decarbonizing our electricity consumption. And so as you mentioned, the 2018 paper that we published was really our first exploration of what is the difference between those two things. And what it showed is that even though we may have been 100% annual match in some geographies in the United States or Europe on an hour-by-hour basis because of the variability of wind and solar that we were purchasing, or because of geographic disparities between where we were consuming and where we were purchasing clean energy, there were still times and places where we were relying on electricity provided by fossil fuels. And so in 2020, we set a goal to try to address that, to say that by 2030, we want to be fully matched with clean energy that we bring onto the grid on an hour-by-hour basis on the same grid where we're supplying it everywhere that we operate, which we call 24/7 clean energy. There's a lot of successes that we've had to date, also a lot of learnings that I think we can share also through the course of this discussion. But just to give you a sense of the numbers, today we are 64% hourly matched on a global average basis across our portfolio. And there's, of course, some places where we have much higher, 90% or above, and then some places where there's still a lot more work to do. So as we move forward here, we're focused not just on how can we decarbonize Google's electricity consumption everywhere across the globe, but how can we do so in ways that also enable others to do the same from a technology perspective, from a contracting perspective, and supporting this growing ecosystem around 24/7 clean power.
Great. Anyone else like to comment? Maybe Irina, you are.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeanette. Following up to what Devon was saying, which was so complete that I don't know what to say anymore. But I think, I mean, the recognition of the importance of carbon-free energy was also arrived also to the United Nations at some point, and specifically after the 2020. So in 2021, with the United Nations recognizing that it was important to have that kind of approach also embedded in one of the 200 UN Energy Compact. And that's why in September 2021, the United Nations, the Secretary General decided to launch a dedicated compact to 24/7 carbon-free energy, with the idea that we have to shift mentality and not only offsetting carbon, but really take responsibilities and try to decarbonize the power sector every hour of the day. And this was the basis, basically, of the 24/7 carbon-free energy that was supported by a number of founding signatories. Among them, there was, of course, Google. We started, as I said, in 2021 with few signatories, and we now have more than 140. So the group is quite big at the moment, and is very heterogeneous. It's a collection of different actors from the private sector, but what is very important is that we have a number of government, local government, national government, cities as well, NGOs, international organizations, energy suppliers, buyers, solution providers. So they're all together, and they're all motivated on starting the 24/7 carbon-free energy journey, which I think is very positive. And what we try to do with our members is to raise awareness of 24/7, try to share the tools, the policies, and the innovation that is emerging, both in the global north but also in the global south. And we see that there is much more interest now from many countries that joined the compact from the global south to start this journey: Vanuatu, Kenya, Panama, just to name a few. And now that we have also the US on board, I think this will expand even more, and we're looking forward to the next phase.
Great. Bruce, how about sharing some information about your organization and the range of technologies you're supporting?
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much for the invite. It's great to be here with the panel of leaders. Before I move on, just a huge congratulations to SEForAll and the US government for that signature. That is really significant. We're also a signatory of the UN Compact, by the way, but not quite as significant as the US government. Also, congratulations for the title, Pathways Towards 24/7. I think that's really important. So we talk about that journey towards, and many people ask me, well, 24/7, it's impossible, it's 100%. I say no, Google's starting at 64%, and it's one of the leaders in the space, and that should be congratulated already. But it's a move towards 100%, and that's going to take time, and it's going to take everybody in this room collectively to make that happen. So, I mean, my personal journey into 24/7 came out of RE100. So we worked with them to establish the resource platform in Europe many years ago, at a time when PPAs also were seen to be visionary. I think we've gone past that now. But the journey was also with RE100 clear that 100% renewables was not enough to completely decarbonize the power sector. So my previous position at Eurelectric, we established a working group on 24/7 on the utility supply side to investigate what it meant and how we could accelerate that agenda. Working with Google then, in my latest role at the Global Renewables Alliance, we've seen the huge value that this journey towards 24/7 has, not just for renewable supply, but also bringing on storage and flexibility, which is key to decarbonization, energy system optimization, but also our sector. And selfishly, we're a supply-side organization representing all the generators, developers, turbine manufacturers globally. It's a demand pull. It's a demand signal for us as well. So 24/7 clearly has a role to play in decarb, but I think also in that energy system transition. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else want to make a comment? Katie or Carlos?
There's not much to add. Obviously, we've heard such a thorough summary here, but I did want to add some perspective from the point of view of a supplier. So we generate electricity and put it onto the grid. And I would say it was quite a long time ago when we recognized that 24/7 was necessary. And at times throughout the last decade or so, it felt a bit like screaming into the void. There wasn't a tremendous recognition. I think there was a lot of momentum behind 100% renewable pledges, and rightly so. We needed to grow the renewable energy that we had. And so it has felt like quite a bit of a journey, but to be here now at the COP with this and many other discussions around 24/7 has been remarkable. And so we're looking to accelerate that pathway, as Bruce was saying. And I think it's also important that he mentioned that this does not mean that you're 100% 24/7 tomorrow. It is a pathway. And what we're, really thinking about is how we can help, at least in the U.S., gain some understanding about what this really means. And so for us, the first place where we really recognized it was in the policy space. So in the U.S., many different states have developed what we call renewable portfolio standards. And it was pretty early on that we were recognizing those aren't going to play out the way that we need them to fully decarbonize the electricity sector. So, for instance, in Maryland, their RPS target by 2030, if you moved that, if you measured that by the annual matching of renewable energy, they could claim that they're 100% renewable, while really being 74% hourly matched clean. And therein lies the problem, because I think, Devon, as you mentioned, it's that 26% that's being backfilled by fossil. And how are we going to help address that 26% to get us to the fully decarbonized energy sector that we need? So that's kind of how we're engaging in this in the U.S., but really excited just to see the prevalence of this here at this COP.
Great. Carlos?
All key points were made here. I don't have much to add except to maybe give perspective from nuclear. I think 24/7 has been a natural thing for nuclear to relate to as a baseload energy source. But I think as we look at this energy transition and decarbonizing the energy system globally, we see how obviously a lot of that growth remains a focus on renewables, rightly so, and kudos to the renewable industry to have reduced costs and implementation, and so that's fantastic. But as we look at by mid-century and the expected growth and forecasts for renewables, that's staggering, right? So I think dispatchable generation, particularly nuclear, perhaps others, geothermal and other clean sources, would perhaps reduce the need to perhaps overbuild wind and solar to match, the loads. Reduce the need perhaps to explore and deploy long duration energy storage, which is a key component of that as well. And also perhaps all this distributed energy, the need for transmission that we know that's more and more challenging to site and to license. So we certainly think nuclear has a very unique role to play into the 24/7 deployment.
Okay, great, thank you. So why don't we transition our conversation to the impact of inclusive technologies that are carbon-free, and how that is going to accelerate and create a market. I'm kind of giving it away here, but I'll just invite Carlos. Why don't you start with that, and then Rich, why don't you be the second one? Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps building upon what I just said, I guess when we look at the role of nuclear, starting with its characteristic of very high capacity factor, right? I think in the United States, very incredible performance. Delivering clean electricity above 90%, 95% of the time, Constellation included. I mean, it's fantastic operation and performance. The fact that nuclear is very energy dense, hence the requirement for land for its deployment is quite favorable, right? When we look at perhaps other sources. One thing that we haven't talked a lot is the requirement for materials, critical materials for the growth of all these new generations. And we think nuclear can, again, plays favorably in that. And then the public acceptance, community acceptance. Up to a few years ago, the NIMBY, not in my backyard, was associated with nuclear. Now we're seeing this actually being across the board with many energy projects, whether they are could be nuclear or renewable or transmission siting has become very, very challenging. So those are the kind of attributes that I think bring nuclear to the conversation that are important to have.
Great.
Well, as we think about this, I often think it's useful a wise person, not me, Stephen Covey, once said, if you want to get somewhere, it's best to begin with the end in mind. And so if the end in mind that we all want is a 24/7 clean electricity grid that's supplying energy with incredible affordability and reliability and security for the systems that it's supporting across a much larger electrified economy, if that's the end we're all heading for, I think we have to approach that, we think we have to approach that with a great deal of humility and sort of look around the world at what's working so far. Where are the places that we know we're already getting closest to that? And so when one does that, sort of looks around the world, we know that the grids that are very high nuclear penetration can effectively accomplish that. So we all see France. We know that grids that are very high hydro penetration can accomplish that. We've seen a number of countries that are are blessed with a very high domestic endowment of hydro. Norway, for example, geothermal, the same. And so you sort of look at that suite of technologies and say, well, so surely those all have to be on the table. And unfortunately, some of those weren't being included in the very, very narrow definitions for renewables procurement that dominated a few years ago. And then additionally, if you look at, around the world, there are fossil assets that perform with very high affordability and reliability and security for the countries that they're working on. We know that we can have a grid that meets those three tests, not the clean test, but those three tests with traditional technology. So we really ought to also at least focus as part of the portfolio on carbon capture to have that hopefully one day as an option for that as well. So all of that led us to a very technology inclusive perspective in all this. Now, of course, most of the technologies that I just mentioned have significant technological demonstration hurdles ahead of them. And so for us, that implied a very innovation-focused agenda to make sure that we were demonstrating that whole family of technologies: long-duration energy storage, geothermal, advanced nuclear, carbon capture, clean hydrogen production, next-generation hydropower, et cetera. And it led us to a policy portfolio in the U.S. very focused on all of those demonstrations, alongside deployment of all the things that we have today. And I think the key is seeing all of these as complementary assets in a portfolio that drives the best chance that we'll get there. And frankly, we still don't know if we can get there globally. We don't know if that technology suite is going to deliver enough options for enough different geographies that are going to be able to keep grids extremely affordable and reliable and secure and deliver 100% clean for the rapidly developing world. I think, unfortunately, the jury is still out, but that is the technology challenge ahead of us and all that, and what we at ClearPath are still pushing so strongly for in the U.S. policy agenda to make sure as many of those technologies are demonstrated and deployable as possible.
Well, it is an interesting concept. Like, we don't know exactly which ones are going to accelerate across the finish line, but also, don't you think like the optionality aspect is part of recognizing that different countries, different policy systems, geography, et cetera, may be suitable for some here and some there.
Yeah.
So,
I just for example, I used to live and work in Indonesia and work with a lot of the large energy consumers and developers in Indonesia. And when you think about the challenge of 24/7 clean in a country like Indonesia, you think about, well, so they have great sun in Indonesia, and where would they put that? Well, they would put it in virgin rainforest that they cut down, right, to make room for new solar development. Is that what we want? Do any of us want more land to be cleared in Indonesia? There's been a global effort to stop and reverse land clearing in Indonesia, right? So countries like that have large areas of pristine biodiversity that we're all working very hard to protect, right? And incredibly dense populations living on the rest of the land, they're going to have very different abilities to approach this than the Mountain West in the United States, which has, what probably could get to 100% renewable energy at high affordability and low cost and high security. And so just different geographies, different national endowments, different population densities, different national circumstances are almost certainly going to imply different technology solutions to all this.
Great, thank you. So Bruce, could you talk a little bit about the value of creating, accelerating the market for this range of technologies? Maybe you can choose whatever you want, but I'm sort of interested in the long duration energy storage needs and the green hydrogen.
So great. You used the word value, and that's what we try to use with renewables as well. Cost is one of the topics, but also the conversation, especially in this context, is not about renewables versus nuclear. You know, the elephant in the room, and in pretty much every room in this event, is fossil fuels. So in every interview I do, we focus on that and the acceleration of renewables. So, you know, cost competitiveness of renewables globally is now unmatched. We've broken records in terms of cost reductions. That's coming to an end now because of the high interest rate environment. But it's also fast to deploy, it's clean, obviously. This year, we're approaching something like 500 gigawatts of installed capacity. Important to note the capacity factor. Note taken. But the importance is that mass deployment of clean, zero-carbon power generation of all types. We, as you know, or you may know, have been calling for a tripling of renewable energy by 2030 to at least 11,000 gigawatts. It's now in the draft text. We'll see if that survives. Our cautious optimism is that it will. It will be in there in the final text, which sends an extremely strong signal. The first time in a climate conference where, you know, it's been a solution-oriented outcome. On enablers, and I think this is going to your question about, you know, how do we deploy renewables to that extent? I mean, there's several I'll point to. The first one is finance, and as with nuclear, you know, we are a very capital-intensive sector, and with the interest rates as they are, in certain emerging markets and developing economies, it can be 2, 3, or even 4 times the cost of capital than it is in the developed world. That needs to be addressed. So finance is key. The second is permitting to get it built. You know, the same questions about grids and nuclears exist for renewables. And at that scale, we're facing, you know, public perception and acceptance topics. But permitting is key to accelerate. So it currently takes longer to permit a wind farm than it is to build it. And with the climate crisis as it is, you know, there's no time for ambiguity or delay on that. The third is grids. Again, similar to nuclear, but we have the extra challenge of 70% of all new renewables will be deployed at the distributed level. So there, you know, rooftop solar, behind the meter, and there you need to have the same level, if not more investment at that level as you do at the transmission level. And finally, on value chains. So there it's jobs, training, manufacturing, you know, a strong, diverse supply chain. On long-duration energy storage and green hydrogen, as I said at the beginning, to scale renewables to 11,000 gigawatts, because of the variable nature of renewables, you need that flexibility and storage. And it's not so much the short-duration storage, which is also needed at the household level, but at utility scale, we need long-duration energy storage, of which there's 4 different types. I mentioned them earlier. And technology ready at the moment, commercially ready, but we need to scale them extremely quick, faster than the renewable scale out. And I'd say the same goes for green hydrogen. It has to be green electrons, but hydrogen can play a key role in that storage and flexibility of the energy system going forward. Thank you.
So we had this question at the earlier panel. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you define long-duration storage? You know, by hours?
More than 10.
More than 10? Okay.
Yeah. Up to, yeah, I mean, a hydro plant, you know, you can store it for weeks, months. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Devon, please.
Can I just come in and how, from the perspective of a large clean electricity consumer looking to do this for our own portfolio in terms of creating this 24/7 profile, how we're thinking about this from a technology perspective. So the first one is the importance of combining a lot of these different technologies together. So typically today, with the kind of annual 100% renewable energy approach, you know, many companies can achieve that by signing a single solar PPA to match their annual output, or a single wind PPA to match their annual output, without thinking about how these resources get blended together to provide a more complete coverage of your electricity consumption, including with firmer resources and things like storage. So, for instance, what we've done in PJM in the United States with AES is we contracted for a portfolio of resources that included wind, solar, and battery storage, which could bring our hourly matching up to around 90% in that market, which is not 100%, and that's important to recognize, and I'll touch on that in a second. But it speaks to the importance of bringing together different resources into the same grid to help provide that clean electricity and increase that hourly match. The second is related to new technologies. What are the technologies that have been discussed here today that we're going to need to deeply decarbonize not just our own electricity consumption, but the broader electricity grid? And just a couple of months ago, we released a report that you mentioned at the beginning about the importance of these, what we call advanced clean electricity technologies, and their role in decarbonization, but also for corporate buyers that are interested in this approach. And so these are things like next generation geothermal technology, long duration energy storage, advanced nuclear power, which is something we're also looking at, and how can these technologies play a role, and how can we as corporate buyers play a catalytic role in helping to commercialize those technologies. And just one data point to leave with is, consistent with a lot of the electricity system modeling from organizations like Princeton University in the US or the International Energy Agency, what we find is that wind and solar and battery storage really are going to be core contributors to grid decarbonization in many places around the world, but that we're going to need a broader portfolio, and in particularly firm, dispatchable clean electricity technologies or long duration storage to cost effectively, deeply decarbonize electricity systems. And we also share some insights from our own modeling for our 24/7 portfolio that basically shows that including these technologies that I mentioned in our portfolio can actually reduce our cost of achieving 100% 24/7 by up to 70% across our global portfolio, which is not inconsistent with a lot of the other sort of electricity system modeling pointing in a similar direction from the system perspective. So it's about getting to clean quickly, but also cost effectively, and broadening the suite of options that we have in order to do that.
Great.
I just wanted to add one more thought to this, which is picking up on something, Jeanette, that you said at the beginning, which is that this is a market signal. And in this 24/7 procurement approach that we're talking about, we think that's one of the most important parts, which is this turns into a market signal. And Constellation in particular operates in organized markets in the US, which means that a market signal is extraordinarily important for us. And so what it can do is it can send the right message about what type of resources you need on the grid that we were just discussing, and also what those kind of last frontier deep decarbonization technologies are going to be. Because there's lots of companies and innovation work being done out there. Devon's company in particular does a lot in this space, has a large budget to do some of this. But what we really need for the entire grid to recognize what those technologies are, or to send the right market signal. And so that means that it will procure things like renewables that you need, like battery storage, long duration and short duration, new nuclear, and also it will send the signal to retain existing nuclear. So I think that that's what we're looking to get right here, is to get all of those pieces together through the market signal that a 24/7 procurement approach can send.
Sure. Irina, would you?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that, first of all, the 24/7 carbon-free energy also recognizes the importance of being technology inclusive, and you mentioned that at the beginning, Jeanette. So all kind of technology that will bring us there fast, they're welcome. But one key point that I would like to make is about equity and fairness. So even if all technology can get us there, they should get all of us there, so also the Global South. And this is a key issue that we've been discussing in the panel just before here, and we discussed with Indonesia as well, all the challenges they're currently facing when it comes to, first of all, coal phase out, because they are relying on a lot of coal. Second of all, what Bruce mentioned just before about the permitting. The permitting at local level is really crazy. Even if they want to include different technology, banks and many of the players during the session were explaining how difficult it is to have PPA working and how many different de-risking instruments need to be put on the table for that. And then another important element is really the finance. So in order to get there, when it comes to countries in the global south, there is really a need of substantial amount of finance. And to reach their target for renewables, for example, 35% by 2025, just for the ASEAN countries, they need 150 billion US dollars every year until, and this is really a huge amount of money. And on the top of that, we have to discuss about adaptation finance, because in many countries, this is a reality. The extreme weather events will need these countries to build the right infrastructure to be ready for extreme weather events, sea rising level. So I think we have definitely to take into account everything when we discuss about 24/7. We have to consider that there is a strong interest of many countries to embark in this journey, in this path, as you were saying, Bruce. But also there are still equity issues that need to be addressed, need to be solved, and we need to find a way to share these innovative tools and technologies from the global north to the global south, but also from the global south to the global south. Like many new technologies are emerging in countries like India and in South Africa as well, and it will be very good to share all that new technology among the different countries that need them.
Great.
I just want to add on I completely agree with Irina. Couldn't agree more about that energy transfer, the financial aid to those emerging markets. Put it in context, 150 billion, it does sound like an enormous amount of money, but last year, $1.2 trillion was given in fossil fuel subsidies. It doubled year on year in the G20, just to,
And just to complement on that, I agree, and 120 billion every year is the amount of subsidies only in Southeast Asia. So, if you take away that and you put it somewhere else, you can achieve a lot.
If I could add, Irina, you raised a great point, and and it points to the new business model that we really need to put in place, right? It's not the status quo that we did in the past, and I think the sharing of risks, how these projects are structured, how risk is shared, and nuclear in particular, we see the advent of the small modular reactors coming in the future, and that could be diverse applications, new stakeholders, and new end users and off-takers. That will require a completely different mindset in how to structure those projects. And from a financing standpoint, that's interesting you mentioned too, that has been one of the key challenges for nuclear worldwide, particularly because these international financial institutions don't naturally favor nuclear projects, World Bank and such. And so one of the reports that's Clean Air Task Force launched this week here at COP focused on how to scale nuclear globally. And one of the many recommendations is something that has been at work for the last 2 years, is the creation of an international bank for nuclear infrastructure to augment and complement gaps that today these nuclear projects, many of them depend on credit agencies, export credit agencies like Exim Bank in the U.S., JBIC in Japan, and others, but they leave gaps. And the IBNI may close those gaps, and they may be fundamental to really see nuclear go forward. But great point.
So one of the pathways that I think a number of us have been focused on are, so how do you conduct these transactions? What are the metrics necessary to be successful? I think there's maybe just a couple of PPAs or MOUs in the U.S. in terms of how to do these transactions. Katie, I'd like to invite you. I know you and Constellation have been working on this quite a bit and quite deep.
Sure. Happy to do so. We have been working on what we call 24/7 deals, or hourly carbon-free energy matching. And it started with building a platform so that customers can see their hourly energy usage as well as hourly generation in the same footprint. So we built a platform which was not challenging, but we kind of got it across the finish line in August of last year. And since August, we have managed to sign 2 24/7 deals with large customers in the U.S. The first is with ComEd, which is a large utility in Illinois, and we signed a 24/7 deal with them to match their energy consumption with 100% carbon-free energy within their grid location, and that is for 54 of their facilities in Illinois. And then next, we signed a different kind of 24/7 deal. And I think that this, really goes to what Bruce was saying, that these things can take many different shapes and sizes, and it really is up to what the customer is looking for. So the next one that we closed was with Microsoft, and it was specific to a location. So for a specific data center that they had in Virginia, they wanted to match the consumption of that data center 100%. That deal ended up being comprised of about 35% nuclear, and the rest filled by new renewables. So I think it's just a good example of how these deals can be structured, what 24/7 can mean to different customers. But the point being that each of those were matching their entire consumption hour by hour with generation on the same local grid. We haven't talked about the location matching part as much, but that's another important detail of these things. And so the last thing I'll say is that while sometimes you kind of hear about, well, can we really do this? Can we, move this to practicality? And I think we've certainly proven that we can. I know in the EU they've made leaps and bounds on it as well. And the two largest RTOs in the U.S., PJM and Emirates MISO area, are able to correspond the generation with into an hourly metric. So their RECs or EACs can be time-stamped now. And so that was, frankly, half the battle. And then the other part is getting consumption data hourly as well. So there are ways you can do that in real time, but we can also use kind of an average weighting factor for that. So I think we're on the way to several more. I'm not going to break any news here, but it's really exciting to kind of see it actually in action.
Devon?
Yeah, thank you. Just fully agree on the data being sort of a fundamental piece here, and there's been a ton of progress in that space that we can talk more about. But I agree that's an important foundation. On the transaction side, from our perspective, there's a few things that we're working on that we've seen to be successful for us, but are also potential to scale for others. One, I mentioned that PJM deal. This is a model that we call carbon-free energy manager, and then we actually wrote a paper about it a couple of years ago. But the idea is instead of a customer like Google or others going out and signing individual power purchase agreements with individual project developers and projects and assembling that into a portfolio, how can we find energy partners, whether they be retail energy suppliers or utilities, to assemble that portfolio on our behalf from different types of technologies that can be blended together to provide a high degree of hourly matching. And so we did that with AES and PJM. We've done it with NG in Germany, which I think in that case was 80% carbon-free energy on an hourly basis, and also with Silicon Valley Clean Energy in California. And that's a model that we're continuing to try to scale and replicate for others as well. The second area I would mention is, this is sort of more specific to the US context, but working with utilities on creating new tariffs that move beyond the traditional green tariff model, where a utility would go out and procure for, let's say, 200 megawatts of solar and then kind of sleeve that into their customers, and as part of this kind of 100% renewable energy annual matching paradigm. And how do we move that towards a 24/7 clean energy tariff that also assembles this portfolio of different resources, including many of these firm dispatchable resources, as a way potentially also to support the commercialization of those technologies and enable that as an option that customers can subscribe to. And so we're doing some work in the United States on that front. And then the last thing I'll mention is just the importance of kind of sharing our learnings, not just us, but many others that are working in this space. Just earlier this week, Eurelectric, so Bruce mentioned, he helped start the 24/7 European hub when he was at Eurelectric. They just put out a really great document that Google and Microsoft and many other energy suppliers contributed to about contracting principles that buyers and suppliers can work into PPAs to move them in the direction of hourly matching. Things like the data management and measurement, or guarantees for carbon-free energy matching of a certain level, or what are the different supply products that can enable customers to do this. So that's a huge piece of how we're going to get there, is sharing and replicating the models that we and others are innovating on, so that more of the marketplace can benefit from them going forward.
Just while we're on Eurelectric, they're not here, we might as well speak on their behalf. In addition to that great report, they also issued a report just recently, a few weeks ago, on hedging benefits of 24/7. which again points to the contracting and business model approach. But what's clear from that analysis that they did is that by contracting 24/7 PPAs, you can limit the exposure to variable fossil fuel prices, and in a period of high fossil fuel prices, of course, you make significant savings in the millions of euros in that analysis. It's definitely worth looking at because economics is the driver for the buyers. Climate change clearly is one of them, but economics is a big driver, and that's a direct benefit that buyers can get.
Sorry. Very quickly to complement, because I think what Devon, but also Bruce was saying was very important. The sharing of the findings, the sharing of the standards and the metrics. This will be the key also for the global south countries to understand what we are really talking about, because very often for them it's difficult to really grasp until the end, okay, how can we replicate that in Indonesia? How can we replicate that in our reality in Panama? So what the 24/7 Carbon Free Energy Compact would like to do next year is to really standardize the metrics and to look into all possible examples of 24/7 carbon-free energy worldwide and what is applicable also to the different countries. This is quite challenging, but definitely we are looking forward to work with many of the signatories that are here with us today to make that happen and to have a kind of catalog of solutions that may be twisted but also replicable in the different countries.
I'm just going to pull a thread on that one because we were at a dinner, Carlos and I were at a dinner last night on fusion, and one of the barriers to accelerating and advancing that technology was a kind of a relatively new development where actually all the actors in the fusion space were starting to share all of their failures, and that is kind of as they've actually started to attribute that to actually accelerate success, because historically that hasn't happened. And what I'm hearing now, what Devon you brought up, is the sharing of the success of like the metrics and the transactions and all that is another kind of acceleration pathway, generally speaking, right, for all technologies that are coming back. So I had to say something about that because I think it's a really not well appreciated barrier, more like a cultural barrier than a technology barrier. So anyone else want to talk about this? Okay, so the Greenhouse Gas Protocol supplies the world's most widely used greenhouse gas accounting standards, and more than 9 out of 10 Fortune 500 companies report to the CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, and they use the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So I think, as many of you know, probably everybody on the panel here, the protocol is currently considering revising Scope 2 guidance, which standardizes how corporations measure emissions from purchased or acquired electricity, steam, heat, and cooling. And so I just invite each of the panelists to maybe share some of their views on looking ahead. I think it's the process is quite, it's a consensus-based process, and I think they've just started the workshops, signing up for the workshops, but I think this is a very pivotal, I think we're having as much fun as they are, we're just quieter, right? So, so if I would like to, you all share whatever thoughts you wish to share on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Scope 2 guidance modernization. Irina, please.
So thank you very much, Jeanette. Well, I think when it comes to Scope 2, first of all, is one of the 3 that has the more loopholes. So the fact that there was a survey, the fact that we are discussing about it, there will be workshops, and there will be the possibility for different organizations to discuss and change the system, I think is very positive. So the Scope 2 definitely can be changed, but we also need to take responsibility. And this is also one part of 24/7, to addressing the problem every hour, instead of simply offsetting. And this is also what we discussed with the SecGen. It's about decarbonizing the grid every hour. It's not about offsetting carbon, so shifting responsibility. So I think this will be the key. The 2 elements that we have to focus, we know already, there is the location and the time. It won't be easy. It won't be easy, because definitely it's not very actionable. And I know that there are 2 different pathways and many different signatories as well. They're considering market-based because it's more actionable, but it's less accurate. So it all boils down to find the right methodology, accounting methodology that works for everyone, but that is also very much focused on location and time, which are the key elements of 24/7 as well. and that is accurate. Of course, it will raise some equity issues again, fairness. I mean, many countries will say, well, it's difficult for us because we don't have hourly matching. How do we do that? But then again, if we start right now and we share the knowledge, by the time this will be enacted, like 2 years' time, I think we are going to have some solutions. And we already see a lot of, as I said before, solution emerging from companies in India, like Greenco. They're really doing hourly matching. They're doing very successfully, Taiwan as well. So we just have to be able to share this knowledge and apply that also to the accounting methodology of the greenhouse gas protocol. But definitely, we need to be accurate. We cannot just shifting responsibility again, like we did in the past.
Maybe it'd be helpful just to briefly describe, maybe for also the viewers that are not as familiar with this, sort of what this is. So as you mentioned, Jeanette, the greenhouse gas protocol and the Scope 2 guidance is the way that most companies around the world today measure and report their carbon emissions from electricity consumption. And the system today has been around for, the Scope 2 guidance has been around for 7 years, the broader greenhouse gas protocol around 20 years, and it's now in a process of being updated. And the current guidance and the way that it's been interpreted is such that, you know, if you are a company that is, let's say, consuming electricity in Kentucky, you can buy these renewable energy certificates from a state like California using solar power to match your annual demand and claim that you are zero market-based Scope 2 emissions and also, well, 100% renewable energy. In Europe, there's also this kind of this similarly wide geographic variation where you can be a consumer in Germany and purchase EACs from Norway, Norwegian Hydro, even though there's like literally no physical direct connection between Norway and Germany, and claim to be zero carbon. And so, you know, we've identified, we're not the only company that's identified this sort of disconnect between what the standards say about how you measure and report your emissions and what's actually happening on the electricity grid. And we've been encouraging, including through comments to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, for move in the direction of what Irina just said, which is sort of greater temporal granularity and greater geographic granularity with respect to how we measure and report on these things. Because, well, it's going to be important from an accuracy perspective. You're already seeing a lot of criticism, and I think one of the reasons why this update process started is because there has been a lot of criticism about the way that companies make claims and reporting based on this current standard. One example is the Ireland, the Irish advertising regulator told Irish energy companies that they can no longer offer 100% renewable energy tariffs because they were using guarantees of origin from Norway to make those claims, and they stated that it was misleading consumers about what they're actually getting. That's one example. There's many others. But more important, perhaps, or as important as the sort of accuracy point, is the incentives that this builds into the system in terms of how companies direct their investments. So today, based on the current standard, there's no reason for a company like Google or any other company to engage in this conversation around, you know, how do we build this portfolio? How do we decarbonize our consumption completely? How do we advance grid decarbonization as most effectively using a wide range of different technologies? Because we don't have to in order to actually claim to be zero carbon. And so I think if we move the standards in this more granular direction, we will start to see investment directed towards many of the technological solutions that we all know are needed to solve this challenge and accelerate the decarbonization of our electricity grids.
Rich, are you giving me the eye? Are you giving me the eye there?
Very quickly.
No?
Well, so first, I learned something there. I'm delighted to hear. As a person of Irish origin, I'm delighted to hear that Irish regulators are getting focused on actual performance in this space, and while we're not deeply involved in it, have been delightedly following this update and this greater focus on performance. I will just note, I think that there's been significant oversight of this from the environmental community concerned about false claims being made. There's also been significant oversight as kind of the broader new tension around voluntary ESG reporting, particularly in the United States, but maybe to a lesser extent globally, with a lot of the folks sort of attacking the ESG project broadly, but using some of these frankly, very, very easy to target inconsistencies in the ESG project to then attack the overall project. So things like this, which allow people to say they're procuring clean energy when it's really quite, that's really quite a stretch. Similarly, things that screen out certain technologies like nuclear energy from certain portfolios and indices have all been real weaknesses in the overall project of voluntary reporting and voluntary action, and I think we're heading in an excellent direction to reform a lot of those things.
I wanted to pick up on something that Irina said that I think is so important. When we're talking about the Greenhouse Gas Protocol update, you have scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 2 is specifically about electricity and how you procure that electricity. And we think that, therefore, you need an accounting system for Scope 2 that reflects how the grid actually works. And so when you hear about some other theories about how Scope 2 should be updated, that can start to look like a little bit more of an offset scheme, that may be appropriate in Scope 1 and Scope 3, and there's a place for offsetting there. In Scope 2, where you're talking about electricity procurement, we think that it needs to be about matching your energy usage on the grid where you're using it with carbon-free energy. And that's, as everything that we've been talking about today, that's how we're going to get to the fully decarbonized system without, as Irina was saying, shifting the responsibility for that last portion if you use these other methods. So I thought that was a great point, Irina, and wanted to emphasize that.
Great. Bruce, do you want to say anything?
Oh, no, I mean, fully support that. And the word accuracy is the key. And the only way to give credit to the buyers is to give that clear accuracy. And as I said, we've been working with RE100 for a long time now, and I think they now understand the value of that as well, and are moving in that direction, which is great to see.
That's terrific. Anyone else want to make a comment before we take some questions? All right. How about some questions from the audience? And I'll give you my mic.
Great conversation. Thanks. I want to kind of, the theme of COP has been action. Right? So I want to kind of pull a thread here. I think this entire conversation was based on voluntary corporate action. Because I think the underpinning of everything you said here, including the notion of get the right market signal, has an implication that we are talking about a market signal, and we are talking about transactions, and we are talking about drive and change fast because of voluntary, or let's call it enlightened self-interest on the part of the corporate community. I think it's driving a lot of what you said, but I want to kind of ask that question. Is that really what's going on here? Is that really what's driving the underpinning of this conversation?
Well, I'll let the buyer, my dear friend Devon, answer the voluntary buyer position, but action also includes governments. The drivers are going to be economics, the market forces of lower cost renewables, and the base load strength of nuclear. But, the main driver really has to be policy. So we need the governments to enact strong, stable, long-term, clear frameworks that allow us to, the market signals that Katie was mentioning. And for 24/7, it's things like, the Delegated Act for Hydrogen in Europe, the imminent hydrogen legislation in the US, whichever way that goes, will be, again, a strong signal for action. Also, the ability for countries to issue and use granular certificates, which was also a blocker, still is in many jurisdictions. So just two examples there of how governments can take short-term, low-cost, no regret actions that will facilitate this movement.
Yeah, I'd say this has definitely started as a voluntary buyer sort of discussion, because I think of the role that voluntary buyers, like the organizations like the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, which Kevin neglected to mention he leads, and that we're thrilled to be the chair of, have played in growing this demand for clean energy. Just in the United States, for instance, last year, corporations signed PPAs for new clean power that were equivalent to 70% of the clean power assets that were delivered onto the grid that year. So it's a massive opportunity. But I think two things. One, buyers are trying to find ways to how do they channel those investments to do the most good according to the way that they think about that. But also it's becoming a regulatory conversation as well. Because even though the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is a voluntary standard, it is also the foundation of forthcoming regulations in California, in Europe, and potentially all of the United States around mandatory carbon reporting disclosure. All of it is pointing to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And Bruce mentioned a really important development as well on the topic specifically of electrolytic hydrogen, where we've seen standards issued in Europe earlier this year that essentially require that by 2030, if you're an electrolyzer, you want to use grid electricity to claim that your electricity is renewable, you have to start doing hourly matching on the same grid from new renewable sources starting in 2030 to verify that claim. And we may see something similar in the United States as well. And so this is essentially regulators saying the current standard that we have today is not sufficient to actually make the claims that companies want to be making around this, because they're essentially developing a different standard from a regulatory perspective. So it's merging together in an interesting way, but I think in a way that is going to ideally make all of these solutions more available for more consumers and bring us all to a place where we're accelerating grid decarbonization more quickly through voluntary actions that are going to result from it.
I'll just add one more point on the merging together of the corporate voluntary action and the policy action. I think corporates have been very powerful as messengers, at least in the U.S. policy dialogue, about needing a full suite of technologies and then the innovation agenda that has followed from that. So I think it was utilities saying, well, we don't actually have a credible pathway to get to achieving our net zero 2050 goals today because we have this technology gap. It was our friends at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Global Energy Institute who have been huge advocates of the innovation agenda in U.S. politics, and the Edison Electric Institute who have driven that as well, alongside the buyers community, all of whom have come together with a number of us advocates in the space to push for more action and more investment in Congress, and that's led to some pretty amazing things. The Energy Act of 2020, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the massive new demonstration program now underway at DOE across all these different technologies. And that was absolutely a result of the, I'll call it corporate voluntary action, but it was corporate voluntary, action. Yeah.
Irina?
Sorry. I just wanted to say, well, definitely when it comes to 24/7 carbon-free energy, compact is a voluntary compact. So all the compacts of the UN are voluntary in nature. They're not legally binding. That said, what we will do starting next year, we start tracking the progress made by the signatories to give a signal as well. And this was something that was raised by signatories themselves. They asked, we want to be tracked. We want to show the world that we are making progress on this journey. And I think it's correct, it's right. So we are going to work with them on this. And the data will be collected and they will be published. They will be transparent officially on the United Nations Annual Report on the Energy Compact. This is one thing. And the second thing is what Bruce, but also Devon was mentioning. It's voluntary, but our final aim, I would say, it's really to make sure that there is regulation in place to support 24/7. In some geographies already happening, like in the European Union. When it comes to granularity, you already have notion of granularity embedded in the Renewable Energy Directive number 3. But many more geographies want to have the same. They're asking, okay, can you help us include that as well in our renewable energy regulation? And we are very happy to do that. So definitely it's voluntary in nature, but what we want to achieve is that they have the right regulatory framework in place to then enable granularity also in different geographies.
Okay, so do we have one last question? Oh, here.
Firstly, thanks for a really interesting conversation. In terms of corporate responsibility, if we look at the fashion industry, Bangladesh, for example, a large percentage of Bangladesh exports go to the States, but there isn't this connection. There's a number of the factories are in the top 10 in terms of efficiency in carbon and green, but they get no benefit for that. So there's a disincentive actually to become green within that context. So how do we square the circle? You have this corporate responsibility in the States or in Europe, but it's not actually translated into where the industry for the ready-made garments is coming from.
Maybe just one thing. So we got a lot of requests from the fashion industry to know more and to be onboarded on 24/7. We had discussion with Uniqlo and with some of the companies that are working with Uniqlo on different geographies in the global south, and we are starting working with them from Q1 next year. So just to let you know that we will really like to raise awareness also about what we are doing on 24/7. And Uniqlo will be one of the first group from the fashion industry that is going to join 24/7, along with some of the companies they're working with in the global south.
I'll just mention briefly the same standards we were talking about, the greenhouse gas protocol, so scopes 1, 2, and 3. And scope 3 is basically everything upstream, within the product supply chain of companies like Google and others. And many companies are increasingly being encouraged and setting net zero goals across their entire value chain. Google's one such company. We have a net zero goal by 2030. And that means it requires us to start engaging much more directly in these conversations with our own hardware suppliers and manufacturers about their specific facilities, energy efficiency, clean energy procurement. How can we build consortia to help them do what they're doing in training? And actually the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance Association, which we are a part of, which we chair the board of, has a new supply chain sort of training type program for those suppliers that want to get started on this journey, and encouraging and sharing learnings from leading companies that are doing this for their own electricity around the world. So there are a lot of efforts afoot to start making more progress there. But I think leveraging these goals that companies are setting for their own operations and their supply chains is a really important way to do it, to initiate and accelerate those conversations.
Just on the reverse side of the coin as well, no doubt we need to credit the buyers, progressive buyers who are moving in that direction, but also from a policy point of view, the example of the European CBAM, so the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which punishes in a way those organizations that are not moving in that direction. We had a great meeting with President Ruto and his team where he said, well, first of all, he said he's bored of importing product from the developed world. He wants to produce green products in Kenya for export. And so, the development of renewable energy in his country to produce green hydrogen, green steel, green, to export back to Europe and exploit the CBAM in a positive way.
Great. Well, I think we have run out of time, but thank you so much to this wonderful panel. It's really been an exciting conversation. I certainly learned a lot. And thank you also for the audience. Just to have it a round of applause.